right, episode 12, 4th and Long coming at you. It's been an exciting season here. Week 13 ended, as we all know, that was the end of our regular season. So we had some ups, some downs, some laughs, a lot of cries, a few choice words, and maybe a friendship was made along the way. But now, of course, we have to recap what was, and we're going to slowly start talking playoffs. So, as always, we have our main man, Randy. Randy, how you doing?
I'm doing okay tonight. How about you?
Another night in paradise here talking football. And of course, for his second appearance, he was kind enough to bless us with his knowledge. Alan, what's up, buddy?
Hello, gentlemen.
Oh, coming in nice and clear, he says. So, we're on a conference call this time, so our technology has already advanced since last episode. So hopefully you guys can hear this loud and clear, so we're going to get right into it. Recapping what was week 13 here. Alan, who did you have as your matchup of the week?
Oh, jeez. My matchup of the week. My matchup of the week this week was probably the bottom feeders versus the Bears. It was an upset, actually. Well, I think it was an upset. I thought the Bears were going to take this one, but I was happy to see the bottom feeders pull out the victory and clinch their playoff spot.
Okay. Randy, what did you have?
I went with a different direction. My game of the week was global warming versus man bear pig.
Okay.
For a bit of a different reason, it was man bear pig pretty much had one chance to make the playoffs, and he would need a bunch of help to get there. And even then, he might not be able to get in, but he almost pulled it off, especially with global warming missing their two key running backs. I'm sure there's a lot of talk in the league about that. But Patrick Mahomes still put up 41 points, and it was pretty hard to make up the ground in that. And Man Bear Pig's kicker and defense did what they could, had some good games, but it wasn't enough to pull it out.
Well, that was an interesting one as well, and I know we'll get into some. I think probably some of those topics you just lightly touched on, maybe later and maybe tomorrow. Well, for the first time ever in the three-person podcast, we are not agreeing. I went in a completely different direction for matchup of the week. I went with Devil Raiders versus Old Dirty Bastards.
Oh, dear God.
And I'll tell you why. I never thought that Kelly would be in matchup of the week. but here we are. Just a few pointers here. I mean, Kelly's season was all for naught when he actually eliminated Jake from the playoffs. Jake was in ninth, but knowing that I was playing Selby, there was an opportunity that Jake could have got in, and who know what would have happened. So, very interesting things with that matchup. Beckham seems to start putting together better weeks as it goes on, but unfortunately it's too late for him playoff-wise. I really don't understand why he didn't pick up a quarterback, but we can...
Yeah, he didn't need one.
Yeah, and apparently he didn't need one.
He went with the Wildcat the whole game.
And for AP, just playing well at the right time. I mean, a 90-yard touchdown run, really? That's 15 points, which is basically all he got in that entire game. So, for Jake, he continues to play in Njoku, and that doesn't help his cause either. Tough pill to swallow when you lose by 0.8 points and your playoff spot, or your first ever playoff spot, because he didn't make the playoffs last year either. He can't win in this league with 4 roster spots equaling 2.9 points. But the reason I make this matchup of the week is because it was so tight with a final playoff spot on the line. I thought this was kind of exciting, especially when a guy doesn't even play a quarterback. So I looked at it from a different perspective on what the outcome officially was and what it meant to one of these teams. So, interesting choices for matchup of the weeks, that's for sure. Let's go back to Randy, your bust. This will be an interesting one. Who'd you have?
Okay, for the worst game of the week, I actually picked Allen's game of the week. I picked the Bears versus bottom feeders. And the main reason was as much as bottom feeders clinched their playoff spot, it was more the ineptitude of everyone else. It's the fact that there was actually no playoff implication in this at all, because even though bottom feeders won and tied the Bears in record. Due to the tiebreak, he couldn't actually pass them, so it didn't actually make much of a difference at all. Of course, a 25-point differential usually helps with worst game of the week, although it wasn't the biggest margin of victory. I'm probably a little bit biased on this too, because I don't know. I'm sure all the guys that read the rankings know I've been giving Corey a hard time about his wide receivers, and I'm still a little upset that he wouldn't trade me a running back. I tried to give him a wide receiver all before the trade deadline. He wouldn't take the trade, and now it's hurting him. And of course, Olsen got hurt. He's done for the year. Kamara had a bad day. On the other side of the ball, Golden Tate finally caught on with the Eagles. Connor bounced back 2 touchdowns. Obviously, Kelsey really lit it up, and that was the big difference in the win. But yeah, just the fact that this was one of the few matchups where it didn't really matter who won. That's why it's my worst game of the week, and the fact it wasn't close or anything like that.
Okay. Alan, do you agree, disagree?
I disagree. I actually, my least favorite matchup was your matchup of the week, Brian.
Okay.
It's hard to look at this matchup between Devil Riggers and Old Dirty Bastards and say it was a good matchup, especially when somebody doesn't play a quarterback, and that the person who doesn't play a quarterback is the person who wins. I mean, it was just an absolute putrid performance from Old Dirty Bastards, and to miss out on the playoffs by that much really sting. Like, you feel for the guy, but his team's just got to put in a better effort next time. And having one goose egg, almost 2 goose eggs on your roster that week really just doesn't help you at all.
Yeah, and I could see. I figured, hey, we can't. We got to find different angles to approach these matchups of the week or bust, and that's why I chose mine. But I can see it from that perspective as well. I mean, the guy doesn't even complete his roster. But interestingly enough, again, we are not agreeing because Randy, I have you in bust of the week. Your matchup, Jägermeisters versus Misfits, another 44-point blowout. Jägermeisters gets the win against the worst team in the league like he should. You ended up being 7 points above your projection, so good week for you. You had the most points in the week. And it actually could have even been higher had Ryan not stuck up the joint against Baltimore. Allen seems to be coming alive with the Chargers for you, which obviously propels you even further up the points. And I think you found yourself a decent wide receiver in Robert Woods. You also have to be pretty happy with how Houston's defense is playing. And just to give you an example of how good they're playing, if you could think of every fantasy position and every player that you can potentially draft and get points, Houston's defense is ranked 91 amongst all fantasy scorers.
Yeah, that's pretty good for defense. Obviously, the key was J.J. Watt staying healthy this year, and he has, so that's good.
Yeah, and you beat it. Yeah, and you beat the team you needed to stay and secure your 7th position.
Right.
Unfortunately, the downside as to this bust is you should have beat this team, and you should have beat them bad. 3 spots was 0 points combined because they had 0 points. Although, you know what, I don't blame Nigel for playing Watson here. I think he had a better matchup than Rivers, even though Rivers got more fantasy points. I think Watson had a better matchup against Cleveland. Things just didn't click. Just no help and no just subpar again for Misfits. It's been the story of the year. Now, we're going to get into that a little bit more as we go on in this podcast. But pretty easy to win when a guy gets 21 points below his projected value. So you put yourself in a right position there. But, to Alan's point, when these matchups are not offensively gifted, you kind of want to put them in the bust category. I kind of look at it, if you get blown out that bad, is it really that good of a matchup either? So I kind of put that one in the bust of the week. But those are kind of the matchups. Now we got to go to individual, and this is where I'd like to see if the mind waves are clicking still. Player of the week, Alan, we will go with you first.
Yeah, so my player of the week is a player that benefited from somebody else being injured. I'm going to say my player of the week is Keenan Allen. He receptions, 148 yards, a touchdown, and a 2-point conversion. And I think he's the main beneficiary of Melvin Gordon being injured. Had an excellent week, and he's actually caught fire late, and he caught fire at the right time going into the playoffs. So I think Keenan Allen's doing a really good job, and I think he's going to stay hot moving forward.
Oh, interesting pick. Randy?
Well, my pick is, this may even be 2 weeks in a row, but this is Patrick Mahomes for global warming.
Oh, Barth,
I mean,
I'm so sick of this
about
guy.
how Kareem Hunt got cut for lying, although it might be for another reason. And Melvin Gordon lost with injury. His 2 strongest players are out, and Ryan still manages to get a win, largely on the strength of 41 points from Patrick Mahomes. 295 yards, 4 touchdown passes. He really avoided, Ryan did, a David and Goliath kind of upset, and he retained first overall regular season, which gets you a bit of a cash. So, it could have all fallen apart for him, and now he's got to rely very heavily on Mahomes, and Mahomes came through this week.
Yeah, but I mean, yeah, I don't know if you heard me when you started going off. I'm just so sick of Patrick Mahomes in this category because, 41 points against Oakland, you should have had 100 fantasy points against Oakland. Let's be, it's just, I don't know. Plus, he's on global warming, and I just hate global warming. So, but no, he's been definitely a smart move, and we evaluated that trade before, and I think it's definitely, especially with what has transpired for Ryan's team, having a guy like that, makes you feel a little more comfortable moving forward. I just trashed a guy for being 12th place in our league, but I gotta tell you, I'm giving Player of the Week to Philip Lindsay, running back for the Misfits. Again, this matchup could have been even further had he just had a quiet week. He put together 157 rush yards, 2 touchdowns on 19 carries. It's the 3rd time this season he's actually rushed for over 100 yards, and he's got 8 touchdowns on the season. I think Nigel might have a keeper in the mist here that he picked up off waivers. So you got to watch out for this guy, and I think, again, you take that point value away from his team. This isn't even close, this matchup. So, great week for him. Unfortunately, it's in a loss for a team that's kind of had a bad season. But a nice way to go out, especially when you're not in the playoffs. Now you're starting to think at your roster and say, what a fucking crazy year that was. Who do I even want to keep? I think this guy proved to you that maybe there's an opportunity to keep him. So I went with Philip Lindsay.
He's certainly worth keeping an eye on the rest of the NFL regular season to see if he stays hot.
Oh, for sure. Yeah, no, I think they got something good there too. So we'll see. So that's an interesting pick, boys. We haven't agreed on one thing yet, but maybe we will with a bust. I'm going to start this one off for me. I just feel for my brother Jake and the old dirty bastards, and I'm giving the bust to Tevin Coleman, running back. Yes, he played Baltimore, who's given up the fewest points, fantasy points to running backs this year, but come on, 8 yards, really? That's all you got in that game was 8 yards, and Devontae Freeman's been on the IR all year, and you don't have a running back, and Matt Ryan had a bad performance. You're telling me you can't run for a first down in 60 minutes? That's just pathetic. 1.1 points. He needed only 8 yards. 8 more yards, and Jake would have won that matchup. So, to me, those stats, what was on the line, Tevin Coleman is the bust of the week for me, hands down. Who, jump in, boys. Don't be shy. Let people know how you feel.
Yeah, go ahead, Alan.
Now, do I have to pick a player? Now, because I've been thinking about this, and I just want to say my bust of the week is the Atlanta Falcons offense. They were all absolutely pathetic.
Interesting. I'd like to hear more about this.
Well, if you look at Matt Ryan, to start, Matt Ryan had a completely awful game.
I agree, honestly.
I think Randy would agree with he had him on a starting roster. 131 passing yards. He lost the fumble. I mean, he got sacked 3 times. I guess you can't blame all of that on him, but, the offensive line has to help him out there. You just talked about your bust of the week, Brian, and how he did absolutely nothing. Let's look at Julio Jones. How did Julio Jones do this week? Because he kind of let Shelly Told Me to down. He had I mean, he had 8 targets, but Matt Ryan couldn't get him the ball, and he only had 2 receptions for 18 yards. And I'm pretty sure one of those fumbles that Matt Ryan lost ended up in a touchdown. So I'm going to just hand my bust of the week off to the Atlanta Falcons offense because they were pathetic this week.
You know, before Randy goes, I'm going to give you a lot of credit. Your second podcast, and you're calling out an entire offense. I respect that.
Thank you.
Randy, go ahead.
Yeah, I'm going to go with, by the way, just I guess a quick comment on Alan's comment about the offense about Matt Ryan. I put in a waiver claim for Case Keenum because Matt Ryan is screwing me over so bad at the wrong time of year. Not saying I'll for sure start him, but I didn't want to be stuck with one quarterback going into the playoffs, especially when it was Matt Ryan. So anyway,
Don't blame
you,
me.
you can read into that whatever you want. But my bust of the week is Aaron Rodgers, and I'm going to borrow some of the logic that Brian had when he criticized my player of the week in the fact that I thought that his 23 projected points against the lousy Arizona offense playing in Green Bay, in Lambeau, I thought 23 points was lowballing him. And, I thought he could easily get into the 30s or higher, especially, when they're talking about how desperate they are, trying to make the playoffs, and they still got a chance if they win out and all this. Well, what happens? He completes 31 passes, which is the second most he's had this year, but 233 yards, 1 touchdown, that's it.
Mm-hmm.
He had a similar game back in the week 2 tie with the Vikings where he had 30 completions for 281 yards. So, what is it where, he completes so many passes, but he doesn't get any yards? What is he just completing 1-yard passes all night? This isn't the Aaron Rodgers that we're accustomed to seeing. And then, of course, the fact, like I said, he could have easily doubled his score into the 30s to against this Cardinals team. He played so bad he got his coach fired. So that's the bust of the week there for that one.
Oh, that's good. You don't hear those guys, or goats as other people call them, tossed into bust of the week very often. But again, I think we did touch base on it last episode that he was going to come out swinging against Arizona. I think one of us said he's coming out and it's time to go to work because he didn't play well against Minnesota the week before. And then you lose, 2017? Now, mind you, that's a missed field goal, but still, the performance doesn't lie. To the point where Brandy says, the coach gets canned. And now, all the pressure is on Rodgers. You can bring any coach in now. It doesn't matter. The quarterback has to perform now. So, he does
have to perform, but I think a bit of Mr. McCarthy play calling was bad. He was forcing the ball into these rookies' hands that apparently they have hands that feet for. And there were a lot of drops by those rookies where, I wouldn't be opposed to them feeding more passes to Devontae Adams, but that's just me. But, get the ball to your studs in those key situations, and last week that didn't happen at all.
No, so we'll see how they respond. They're still mathematically alive, but we'll move on here. Speaking of people who are not moving on, we are going to discuss 4 teams that are in our league that did not make the playoff cut this year. We're going to talk about maybe what kind of transpired, what went wrong, maybe things to improve on, or any other stats or questions or criticism these guys want to add to it. Guys, I was thinking we're starting at the bottom and work our way up. So I figured we start with Nigel and the Misfits in 12th position. If you want, does anybody want to go first, or do you want me to kind of go?
I'll give it a go here, I guess.
Sure. Start us off.
So I'm looking over Nigel's roster, and so he's got Deshaun Watson at QB, and we all knew that there was going to be some regression with Deshaun Watson. I think one would say you're kind of insane to think that he's going to keep up that pace that he's had last year before he tore his ACL. And then at the wide receiver position, he has Amari Cooper. doesn't really have that much depth at the running back position. He got an absolute done in Philip Lindsay. Dion Lewis was one of his keepers, and he didn't really, I had high hopes for Dion Lewis this year. I thought he was going to do a really good job with that offense in Tennessee. It just really, he had that one good game, but it really hasn't transpired to much this year. And then, there were a lot of weeks where it was, what quarterback do I pick, And sometimes he just wasn't picking the right quarterback. So, all in all, it really didn't have the strongest roster this year. And, that's kind of where I'm going to leave it. I mean, Trey Burton really didn't perform up to expectations. I thought he was much better than the offense. And he really hasn't done much.
Yeah, for sure. I'll just kind of follow up here, just kind of on the flow or the outline I built here, and for how I'm gonna talk about each of these teams as we go along. So we all know his keepers were Dion Lewis and Deshaun Watson, like Alan mentioned. His next first three picks were Cooper, Hogan, and Jamal Williams, running back from Green Bay. So those are setting up your first five. Okay. He finishes the year at 3-10, and he has the lowest points for by at least 100. So his team, like to Alan's point, did not perform. He was only averaging 79 points a week for the season. Dion Lewis, we can all look at his roster and look at his stats. So he had 87 points. Watson's got 263. It's kind of hard to compare the quarterback thing. But you look at the core of which he drafted, okay? Cooper had 93 points, 700 yards, 4 touchdowns. Hogan, 52 points, 400 yards, 2 touchdowns. No longer on his roster. Jamal Williams, 46 points, 293 rush yards, 1 touchdown. He's not on his roster. Throughout the year, he's cycled through 6 different defenses. No real major injuries to speak of on the team. So if you look at those stats alone, it can tell you that the first 5 picks didn't even remotely stand a chance. They didn't produce at all. I think the problem was with Lewis. I think he, from the year before, you have to pick people off your team. But he was put into a committee position with Derrick Henry, and neither of those guys has really done anything. So your running back is in a committee format. Cooper was tossed around, and let's be honest, Oakland had a shitty year. Hogan kind of takes the back seat because New England decided they're going to do the run game this year until Edelman comes back. No real depth, like you mentioned. I agree with you. His running back depth outside of Lindsey is nothing to be mentioned. My advice to him would be that he keeps Watson and Lindsey, and he focuses on early depth or best depth that he can, because he's going to be drafting in the 8th position, 9th position, somewhere down there. So he's going to have to get a big stud player in that round, and if I was him, I'd probably be trying to focus on a running back. But that's kind of my summary for him. It just, nothing really clicked because the personnel wasn't there to do anything, unfortunately.
Do you keep a QB?
Pardon?
Do you keep a QB like that?
You can keep who? Oh, you're asking a question?
Yeah, do you really want to keep a QB? I'm cringing at the thought of keeping a QB.
Well,
Any of them, really. Even the one QB I would even remotely think about keeping would be Patrick Mahomes. And even then, you cringe a little bit because they're not really worth that much. You can get a good QB in the 10th round. So.
Okay, so look at his before we let Randy kind of do his summary here, and Randy, you can chime in on this as well. Well, who would you take if you tell me, Kate, Nigel, don't take a quarterback? Who would you keep off that roster?
You guys are gonna think I'm insane because I just kind of a little bit, but I would potentially keep Amari Cooper if he stays in Dallas because he's starting to be the guy there next to Ezekiel Elliott.
But you don't think in the first round you could get a better wideout than Amari Cooper?
It's possible.
And keep a young quarterback, you know what I mean? I get where you're coming from too, because but it's tough. Randy?
Yeah.
Yeah, the old don't keep a quarterback rule, that works for most rosters. For this roster, I say you have to keep your 2 best players because you don't want to be stuck in this building phase for much longer. next year, which I'm sure he will be, and that he'll continue his role. He's got to be your anchor you're built around, and like, trying to pick, like, I know Mari Cooper's the head guy in Dallas, and I'm sure they'll try to get him more in the playbook next year, and there is a possibility for that. But the only way I see him keeping Amari Cooper is if Cooper starts to light up towards the end of the season for the Cowboys. Other than that, like, there's nothing wrong with keeping a good fantasy quarterback if that's your best option. Because, most teams won't keep a quarterback, but if you've got a real depth problem and you have a good quarterback, then you keep him and you use that 10th round pick on something else. So, like, you don't have to. There doesn't have to be this golden rule that quarterbacks are always a dime a dozen because one of the things we've criticized Nigel for was keeping Dion Lewis. Well, we don't want him to have to keep Dion Lewis or another second string kind of fantasy player again. You want to keep A-plus prospects as much as you can, and even if Deshaun Watson had a bit of a down year, I think he's still a good enough quarterback to keep.
Yeah. No. Yeah. So I get it. It's tough. You never know, right? But Randy, is that all you wanted to discuss on this team?
I did want to mention just a couple of quick things about Nigel. You guys touched on most of my points as well, which I think we would all agree on.
Okay.
One thing I said, there was one injury that I paid attention to, and that was Tyler Eifert, the tight end for Cincinnati, went down in week 4, and obviously I think Alan mentioned Trey Burton didn't do much for him. Eifert wasn't really highly touted, but I always thought that was a position where Eifert might have actually been a half-decent tight end this year. Might have given some stability at that position, certainly better than Trey Burton. So that was one injury that definitely could have, if it doesn't happen, definitely could have improved Nigel's team for sure. I do also remember I was sitting next to Nigel on draft day there, and right after the draft was over, he was a little concerned about his lineup, so he was a little disappointed with how he drafted there. So I'm sure he's looking for another shot at improving his team there next year.
Oh, well, hey, you got to start somewhere, and he'll be drafting 8th unless he made trades. But I didn't really see misfits come across, so 8th every round for him. So. Randy, instead of us taking all the points away this time, I'll let you start off with the 11th seed moving forward into next year. Kelly and the Devil Raiders. Run us through what happened there.
Okay, well, kind of the order I do this in, I'm going to list his 2 keepers from last season were Jordy Nelson and Rob Gronkowski. He had a couple of key draft picks, which were very good for him. OBJ, who he drafted and played as a wide receiver anchor, that was a very big one, and Marshawn Lynch, who was his anchor running back until he got hurt. Now the main thing with this team was definitely injuries. I think we can all agree on that one. Marshawn Lynch, like I said, he ended up having a second life there in Oakland until he went down. Rob Gronkowski has been hurt on and off all year, and it's really affected his value. Cooper Kupp got really hot for the Rams, and then he went down for the season. And then, as we had famously said in the week that was, Andy Dalton hurt his thumb, and that left Kelly without a quarterback. So Kelly really hitched his wagon to the Oakland Raiders this season. Starting the season with Derek Carr as his running back, Jordy Nelson as a keeper, like I mentioned, and Marshawn Lynch as a draft pick. Like I said, Lynch played good, but then he got hurt. The passing game in Oakland was atrocious, so the other 2 guys did nothing. He ended up dropping Derek Carr. The tight end position should have been a strength with Gronk, but it ended up being a weakness because you can't not start Gronk if he has a chance to play, but he never put up any points for him. I believe he had 7 catches in week 1, and that was his ceiling for catches, which is really down for a guy like Gronk. So my final analysis was there were key injuries to key players at key hot streaks, and that really crushed him as a team, and really crushed his hopes. Like you can tell, he didn't look too hard for any kind of a third-string quarterback or anything to play the last week, and that just kind of is a sign of a man whose spirit is really crushed.
Yeah, unfortunately, I would agree. Yeah, I'm not going to add too much more, and then I'll let Alan just quickly chime in here. I think Randy, you touched base on a lot of good points, kind of what I was looking at here as well. I'm just going to add in another name in the top five picks. He picked up Kenyon Drake. That was his other draft pick in the top five there. So if you look at the names you mentioned plus Drake, not a bad roster, right? You take injuries out of the core, that's pretty good. Um, just
Yeah, it
things,
took
things,
Drake about half a season to get going, unfortunately.
but on paper, okay, we're starting to do something here. But unfortunately, nothing panned out. OBJ actually looks better on paper than he did for the first 9 games of the season. So I think things just didn't click there for him. You touch base on his two quarterbacks combined. Those guys have 37 touchdowns. What does Mahomes have? Like 42 or something?
Mm-hmm.
So it just gives you an idea. The quarterback position didn't even really help him out there either. I just think some of his guys just fell apart. He did have a ton of injuries, unfortunately. I think Cooper Kupp could have done well, and I think that would have not been well for you. I think Cooper Kupp would have taken shots away from Woods.
Mm-hmm.
But never really had a good performance for back-to-back weeks. Finished 4-9, averaged 87 a week. You know what though? I think if you're Kelly, looking at this roster, boys, and Alan, I know you will probably. I don't know. I'd like to see what you have to say about this because I'm going to try to predict keepers for these guys.
Okay.
I think your hands are tied here, and I think you have to keep Beckham and Gronk.
Yeah. Yeah, that's who I think too. I mean, like you can keep an eye on Gronk how he does the rest of the year and into the playoffs, and how his injuries heal. But yeah, like I don't see anyone else that you keep
And
unless you keep Lynch.
well, we'll see what Alan has to say.
Okay, well, the first questionable thing about the roster is keeping Jordy Nelson. I feel like how he lived and died by the Oakland Raiders this year. It kind of just went down with the tip. Um, you touched base on Kenyon Drake and how, I mean, if he got more touches, he would have been an RB1 this year, but he was stuck in a pretty tough time share with Frank Gore. If you look at who he picked, number 8, number 9, he actually picked two stud running backs who are starting to turn out to be stud running backs, and Brady Cohen and Marlon Mack, and he actually ended up dropping both of them, so that hurt him in the long run. I like who he picked 12th overall, though, is Kenny Galladay. He's actually turned out to be somebody really good. And in all honesty, I mean, he kind of pulled off with Marvin Jones going on the IR and all the injuries that the Lions have had. But if I were to keep anybody, I would be keeping Odell Beckham and Kenny Galladay, because I think Kenny Galladay is going to be the guy in Detroit. And you know what? I think Gronk is going to retire. I don't think he's in a Gronk smash anymore.
Well, and that's that's a point that could be discussed. And I mean, obviously, we don't have to make these decisions till late August. So there's time. But I just think again, we'll see. And unfortunately for Devil Raiders, hey, remember he was in 12th for a long time. So you move up one spot. I think that if you take any positives, you didn't finish 12th.
Yeah.
So we'll go on to the 10th seed here, and we'll keep moving on. I'll just kick it off with Jerry, our West Coast boy and man bear pig. His keepers were Bell and Brady, and you have to love knowing those are your keepers coming into the draft. I would think, even with the media and the potential of Bell, I think that was a smart move on him. You can't give him up. And then his next 3 picks were Hopkins, Baldwin, and Graham. And to me, he was set up for success off that. You have a stud at every position, actually. You think, okay, this guy's going to be scary. And he ends up finishing 4-9, and he allowed the second most points against. And Bell, of course, doesn't help his cause here, and we could talk about that all day, and we have touched base on that numerous times. But 0 points for the whole season, obviously, due to contract holdout. And I think right then, this is the Achilles that snapped right off the frickin' bone. Because that is a position where a guy like Ryan and now Dylan, even though he's going to not play this week in Connor, let's be honest, guys, I don't think Connor gets who Connor is. He doesn't become that guy. Brady, he starts off slow, but I think he's starting to pick up groove, and as much as I'm not a fan of his, fantasy-wise, He does put up numbers and he can make things happen. So, but to me, the biggest points I want to bring up here that you guys might find interesting is I just praised his next three picks: Hopkins, Baldwin, and Graham. Now Hopkins has had a great year. Let's be honest, 1,000 yards, 1,100 yards, 8 touchdowns. But look at the next two guys: Baldwin, 50 points, 388 yards, 2 touchdowns. Jimmy Graham, 65 points, 536 yards, 2 touchdowns. You guys can tell me right off the hop who their quarterbacks are. Russell Wilson and Aaron Rodgers. You don't think those guys are fantasy studs? What happened here with Baldwin and Graham? That, to me, although set up for success, those guys never got any love. So you can't produce, and I don't understand that because those quarterbacks, they throw the ball. The running back position, which I think is crucial in this league, as you guys all know, I like to draft depth at that position. I felt this roster didn't really have much regards to that depth. So I think, in my opinion, I would probably move forward. I think, depending on what happens in the offseason, keep that in mind. I would keep probably Bell and Hopkins. Although I got to tell you, I love the 11th round draft pick for Jared Goff.
Yeah, I do tend to agree with you on some of those points. Although I will contend with your idea that DeAndre Hopkins had a great season. He had an inconsistent season. I looked at this, at least fantasy wise, his stats. He had 7 games of 10 plus points and 5 games of less than 10 points. That's almost half the time he had a poor game. 7 to 5 for a stud wide receiver like he's supposed to be is way too low for me. I prefer like someone that was more of like a 9-3 split.
Okay.
But like, you know, those 7 games were still good games. I'm not going to knock that. I'm also going to make a point about what Alan mentioned about I believe it was about misfits about starting the right quarterback. Well, Jerry had Brady and Goff. Obviously, Goff was not supposed to be this fantasy stud. He was just supposed to be a young quarterback learning the game. But Goff outplayed Brady. Let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 weeks this season, and he was only started for 4 weeks by Jerry, and only 2 of those actually match up. So only twice was Goff started when he outplayed Brady. So there were a lot of quarterback points left on the bench every single week, and I know because I did this, because I do the rankings, and I would mention this a few times about how Goff would have 40 points on the bench, Goff would have 50 points on the bench, and this and that. You know, obviously Brady's your keeper, and he's consistent, and he's the guy you know, and that's fine. But at some point, Jerry would have to wake up and say, "Look, this Goff guy's the real deal." And I think he should be a keeper as long as this offense stays together and keeps hitting. And I know we talked about this as well when we were talking about Le'Veon Bell and whether he'd hold out the whole year or not. I think Bell is a keeper for Jerry as well. I think he's worth at least keeping around to see where he winds up in the off season.
Mm-hmm. Alan?
Well, I think the whole season went wrong when Le'Veon Bell decided to not play football. I think that kind of screwed him over. Jimmy Graham, I said I would never draft him again. Hurt me once in fantasy football. He'll never hurt me again.
You're in a safe place now.
Honestly, it matters when it comes to keywords, it matters where Le'Veon Bell goes. If you decide to keep her or not, I think DeAndre Hopkins is a locked-in keeper. If you look at the game DeAndre Hopkins did well in, there's one X factor, and that's Will Fuller. Every game DeAndre Hopkins did really well in, it was because of Will Fuller. And that translates to Deshaun Watson doing well. Because every time Will Fuller was in, Deshaun Watson had a game. So if Will Fuller can stay healthy, DeAndre Hopkins will be a stud next year. Because Deshaun Watson will be better because he'll have the guidance for the field. I think Jerry drafted pretty well. I mean, if you look at his team, he's got an absolute wagon on paper. But I'll always question Greg the legs for 6th round. don't really. I mean, I know
Yeah.
he's a kicker, but there are other guys I guess you could have picked in the 6th round. But he got a stud of a running back in the 8th round. It's Tony Michelle, and I know they all say don't draft him with running back, but I think they're going to be going to the run the next 2 seasons. And then picking up Isaiah Crowell in the 12th round actually turned out to be pretty good for him. And taking Jared Goff in the 11th ended up being good. It's just kind of a season of bad luck, I would say, for Jared, and not starting the right quarterback, and you know some injuries didn't go his way either, and it just overall was a bit of an unlucky season, I think.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think he did draft. I think he had the highest draft grade actually, if I remember appropriately. He did pick up some guys, and they've had some years. Just like to Randy's point, maybe he didn't always crack the starting lineup. And hey, that's fantasy, right? You also have to manage. So it's an interesting time for him. But hey, he positioned himself and almost took out a Titan, which could have made things very interesting for at least $50 anyway. Um, but he'll be drafting in a decent position here. So our last team that didn't make the playoffs, as we all know, is Old Dirty Bastards. Jake, Alan, let's just go back to you on this one. I'll let you start it off.
Okay. Well, his keepers, AJ Green and AJ Green and Carson Wentz. Carson Wentz didn't have a great season because if you look at his roster, he basically played Big Ben the whole season. So Carson Wentz had a pretty big touchdown regression, and I mean he also didn't play the first 2 games of the season, which really didn't help him. And I feel like he's not fully healed from his tear. Isn't the same quarterback that he was. Next, he took Devonta Freeman. Now he drafted right before me, and I was praying that he was going to take Devonta Freeman over Jordan Howard, and both of those running backs ended up being complete busts this year. I mean, Devonta Freeman ended up on the IR, which really didn't help him. And then after that, I don't know. I didn't really like how well he drafted after the 3rd round. I mean, Evan Ingram was a good pick in the 6th. Ronald Jones really never turned to anything. And then Bilal Powell, unfortunately, had a neck injury. I like how he drafted O.J. Howard because he ended up being that, but unfortunately he dropped him throughout the season. So he didn't really have that much running back depth. He drafted a lot of running backs, but he didn't really have any quality running back. He went quantity over quality on this one. And then, I mean, he drafted Devin Funchess. I'm going to kind of just leave it at that. I'm not a big fan of Devin Funchess. So yeah, he could have definitely used some better running back depth this year, and I feel like that's what ended up causing him to miss the playoffs by not even a full point. So.
No, for sure. Randy, you want to just add on anything, or?
I'll add on a couple of things. I guess first, he also drafted a rookie kicker, and it was the worst rookie kicker you could possibly pick, Daniel Carlson.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I think...
how soon we forget that name.
There's a reason why kickers kick until they're 50 or 60 years old, because the good ones stay in the league forever. And there's a lot of pressure on those guys. You never realize how much pressure there is. Like, every quarterback, every incomplete pass, they have someone to blame. The kicker got no one to blame but himself when he misses. He can blame the holder all he wants. It's usually not the holder's fault. It's the kicker that misses. So young guys, it's really hard to handle that stuff. So I would never take a chance on a rookie kicker. That's why I take the old guys. But a further one to that, he was 5-4 going into week 10, and he lost 4 straight to end the season. No coincidence, AJ Green went down in week 8. And week 9 was his bye, and he returned in week 13, but Andy Dalton was out. So AJ Green, who was actually doing pretty good for him, that injury really started his downspin and his 4 straight losses. And that was really the turning point for him as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah, you guys touched on pretty much everything I just wanted to mention. I think he just you have to remember. I mean, we look at this roster and say maybe there's not the depth there or whatever, but Randy, I know we were talking about it earlier on in the fantasy year. How many times did Jake lose based on a Monday night game? There was about three of them. There was about there was about three of them I can think of off the top of my head, where it just came down to Monday night and the points just didn't shake down. I know he almost beat Ryan a few weeks ago when he played Global Warming on the Sunday night when Philly came alive and Zach Ertz got a couple touchdowns to pump him ahead. So he was in some games. He just wasn't able to secure the wins, but I agree with you, Alan. Fourth overall, Devin Funchess is probably not the best pick at that point in the draft. And then the very next pick, he picks Coleman. Now, after 5 picks, you've handcuffed yourself already because you picked Freeman with your first pick, and then you picked Coleman with your third pick. Now, luckily, having Coleman, because Freeman went on the IR, but had Freeman stayed healthy, Coleman probably wouldn't get too many touchdowns, or he'd vulture Freeman's productivity. So it'd be kind of interesting on how that roster would have played out.
Unless we played them both.
Well, yeah, but then are you benefiting? Are you benefiting from that though?
Yeah, I know. It's just that you're guaranteed to get every rushing touchdown for the Falcons at least that way.
Yeah, that's true.
Which ends up not being very much. So where you go from there.
And just go ahead.
Oh no, I was just saying, I rip on him for drafting Devin Funchess in the 4th round, and I drafted William Freeman in the 4th round.
But I like the addition he had though, and the acknowledgement to say, I kept Wentz. I think the kid can maybe do something based off of what we saw him do before he tore his ACL. To add Big Ben, who's had a monster year, and I think that was a smart move to get that guy when he did. To say, okay, I know I have potential in a quarterback, but I want a security blanket. So I think he chose the right blanket. Problem here too, though, is most of the year he was playing 2 tight ends, and they were not good. So that was 2 other roster spots that didn't help. But for my advice for him, I think he's starting to build up. I think he's starting to get into the picture there. I think in this roster, I'd probably keep AJ Green just because of what he can do. And then probably, again, Alan, you're not going to agree with this, but I think I personally would probably take Big Ben over Carson Wentz.
You guys are killing me with the keeping of quarterback.
I just can't justify keeping I can't justify keeping a wide receiver on this team outside of AJ Green, and I can't justify keeping a running back knowing that he's drafting in the 5th position.
No. And I mean, next draft, there's going to be some pretty good running backs in the first round.
So, that's kind of the summary, unless you guys want to add in anything else on any of these teams, anything in regards to that.
No,
not too much. Yeah.
Okay. So that kind of
into them pretty good.
Yeah. Well, hey, we're gonna do our playoff edition tomorrow. That'll be a different one. We're gonna look at the 4 matchups. We're gonna break them down somewhat similar to this and see where they're going. Of course, just for everybody, we have Global Warming versus Shelly Told Me To, the 1v8. Clueless and Jägermeister, 2 boys on here. That's going to be heated. Tune in tomorrow for that one. That's a 2v7. Screaming Beavers versus Dylan and the Bottom Feeders, 3v6. And Cody and the Texas Walker Rangers versus Corey and the Bears, 4v5. So it's put up or shut up now, boys. So it's going to be interesting to see how this plays out. But I think we got some good matchups. I look at the projections. Man, they're close, eh?
That's why it's the playoffs, right?
Yep.
We're the good guys here. We're all supposed to be top of the heap.
Yep. So we're about to find out. So hey, we'll.
There's the guy in 7th, of course, right? I'm kind of bragging it up like I'm as good as you guys, but
So what we'll do? We won't carry on any longer. I think we've done well here. We took a lot to break down the woes that is, and I think it's going to be interesting to break down these playoff matchups, and we'll go forward. So for those of you who didn't make it, better luck next year, and do your homework. For those of you in the playoffs, man, it's going to be interesting. It gets exciting now, boys. So everybody, good luck this week if you're in, and we'll talk to you guys later.
All right. See you in the playoffs, boys.